Antarctica, the land at the edge of the world, a frozen wilderness of towering mountains, broken icebergs, and endless snow. Despite modern touches like research stations, tourists, and even a Metallica concert in 2013, Antarctica still feels primal and awe-inspiring. Cold, dry, windy. It's the most uninhabitable place on Earth. Once known as the Great White Silence, the Southern Land, this mysterious continent remained undiscovered for centuries. Today, though, it's home to scientists, tourists, and even yoga classes at the pole. But how did we conquer Antarctica, and why doesn't any country own it? In the 2nd century AD, Marinus of Tyre believed a vast, unknown land existed in the south. He named it Antarctica, but its story began millions of years earlier. Over 600 million years ago, Antarctica was part of Gondwana, a supercontinent that included South America, Africa, India, and more. Back then, Antarctica was nothing like the icy desert we know. It was lush, covered in rainforests, and even home to dinosaurs. For millions of years, it thrived in warmth, but 35 million years ago, ice sheets mysteriously began to form. As the ice spread, life retreated. The once thriving land slowly became a frozen wasteland. Around 3 million years ago, the continent entered a deep freeze, covered in ice sheets up to 3 kilometers thick. Life vanished. The Antarctica we recognize today had arrived. Centuries later, humans began speculating about the existence of a hidden southern land. Marinus gave it the name Antarctica, setting the stage for the epic discoveries that would follow. Today, it remains a land of mystery, adventure, and scientific exploration. For centuries, Antarctica existed only in the imagination. In the Middle Ages, mapmakers even added a mysterious, vast land in the south called Terra Australis Incognita. After Australia's discovery, though, that name was taken, leaving this southern land nameless again. Despite its presence on maps, no one had seen Antarctica. The closest anyone got before the 19th century was James Cook. Between 1772 to 1775, Cook circumnavigated the globe near Antarctica but never spotted it. He did, however, see fur seals, lots of them. And this brings us to the first phase of human interaction with Antarctica: exploitation. After Cook's return, hundreds of ships raced to Antarctica to hunt seals. From the late 1700s to 1830, nations trapped and killed so many seals that they almost wiped them out. It's possible the first person to set foot on Antarctica wasn't a heroic explorer, but a sailor too busy clubbing seals to notice he'd made history. Despite this harsh reality, the allure of an undiscovered land grew. By 1798, Antarctica had entered popular culture, appearing in Samuel Taylor Coleridge's famous poem, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The poem, often remembered for its obsession with albatrosses, also evokes a haunting image of an unknown Antarctica, a jagged, icy wasteland. Thus began humanity's complex relationship with the last true frontier. In 1820, 3 men from different nations became the first to see Antarctica. Like a fairy tale, each saw a bit more. Russian naval officer Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen first glimpsed the ice shelf. 2 days later, British expedition leader Edward Bransfield saw what might have been part of the mainland. Finally, American Nathaniel Palmer spotted the mainland rising from the frozen seas. Rather than celebrate, they spent their lives fighting over who was first. Still, they confirmed a new land at the South Pole. The mystery of Antarctica lingered. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe's The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym imagined it as a tropical paradise with hidden humans and a giant white figure guarding a hollow Earth. This wasn't far-fetched for the time. Many believed Antarctica could be a tropical rainforest, or even house gods and monsters. Few explorers ever got close enough to land. That changed in 1895 when Karsten Borchgrevink, a half-English, half-Norwegian explorer, landed at Cape Adare, becoming the first person recorded to stand on Antarctic soil. Or so he claimed. A 17-year-old New Zealander, Alexander von Tunzelman, who was on the same expedition, insisted he was the first to step ashore. Whoever was truly first. Borchgrevink's journey sparked the scramble for Antarctica. Borchgrevink wasn't done. After the Belgian ship Belgica accidentally got trapped in Antarctic ice in 1898 and survived, Borchgrevink was determined to be the first to overwinter there, on purpose this time. His ambition marked the start of the heroic age of exploration, setting the stage for future legends like Scott, Shackleton, and Amundsen. In 1899, Borchgrevink and his men built the first permanent structure in Antarctica and hunkered down for the harshest winter of their lives. Trapped by hurricane-force winds and bone-chilling cold, they suffered from extreme cabin fever. The air reeked of penguin droppings, the only available food was penguin meat, and fuel came from burning penguin fat. Tempers flared, a fire nearly destroyed their hut, and one man tragically died. Borchgrevink later described the bitter silence between the men as deafening. Despite the hardships, Borchgrevink's expedition sparked new interest in Antarctica. His efforts paved the way for the legendary British explorer, Robert Falcon Scott, who embarked on his own mission in 1910. Known as Terra Nova, Scott's expedition aimed to advance scientific knowledge and claim the South Pole for Britain. At the time, he was confident of success. Unbeknownst to Scott, a Norwegian explorer named Roald Amundsen had secretly set his sights on the same goal. Upon reaching New Zealand, Scott received a telegram from Amundsen, cheekily announcing his intention to beat him to the South Pole. The race was on. Just a decade earlier, Antarctica had been a mysterious, almost unreachable place. But by 1910, it was within reach, with whaling stations opening and new routes being mapped. The Age of Heroes had begun, and while no one could have foreseen the tragic end, Antarctica was fast becoming a land of exploration and conquest. In January 1911, Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his crew landed at Ross Dependency, Antarctica. With winter approaching, they set up base camp, doing scientific work and even chasing penguins for fun. By October, Scott was ready to begin the long trek to the South Pole. Things quickly fell apart. Their motorized sledges broke down after 50 miles, forcing them to rely on dogs, who soon started dying. Meanwhile, Roald Amundsen's team faced similar issues but used a grimmer solution, feeding dead dogs to their surviving ones. Scott's progress was painfully slow. By January 3, 1912, Scott's group had to be thinned. He chose Dr. Edward Wilson, Lawrence Oates, Henry Bowers, and Edgar Evans to continue. None would return alive. They finally reached the pole on January 17th, only to find a note from Amundsen, who had beaten them by 33 days. The return journey was brutal. Exhausted, frozen, and starving, the team slowly disintegrated. Edgar Evans died in February, and by March, Captain Oates, suffering from gangrene, famously said, "I'm just going outside and maybe some time," walking into a blizzard to his death. Just days later, a storm pinned Scott's remaining team down 11 miles from a supply depot. Scott's final diary entry on March 29th showed the team's grim acceptance of their fate. Though they failed to beat Amundsen, Scott's team made lasting scientific contributions, including fossils that later helped prove Antarctica had once been connected to other continents. In the end, Scott's expedition left a legacy that outlived their tragic loss. Ernest Shackleton's 1914 Antarctic expedition nearly ended in disaster when his ship Endurance became trapped in pack ice. Starvation seemed inevitable. But unlike Scott, Shackleton pulled off a daring escape. In a small boat, he and a few men rowed 14 grueling days across the Southern Ocean to reach South Georgia. They then trekked over frozen mountains before scaling a cliff to a whaling station in safety. It was a feat of unimaginable endurance, but fate had a dark twist. After surviving the ice, Shackleton's men were sent to fight in World War I. The end of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration came after the war, with aviation technology transforming how humans explored the continent. In 1929, Richard E. Byrd flew over the South Pole, marking the end of the era of sled dogs and frostbitten men. By the 1930s, Antarctica was no longer a mystery. H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness was one of the last great stories of speculative fiction about the frozen land. By WWII's end, global interest in Antarctica surged. The U.S. launched Operation High Jump in 1946, sending 4,700 men and taking 49,000 aerial photos to map the continent. As nations staked their claims, the potential for conflict loomed. Britain, Argentina, and Chile set up rival stations near each other, accusing one another of spying. Meanwhile, the US and Soviet Union grew increasingly suspicious of each other's activities. Antarctica, once a place of heroic exploration, was becoming a stage for Cold War tensions. As the Cold War heated up, fear grew that the Russians might place nuclear missiles in Antarctica, sparking a new arms race. By 1950, diplomats scrambled to demilitarize the frozen continent. No one wanted another war, especially over ice. Fortunately, a major event shifted the conversation. The International Geophysical Year from 1957 to 1958 focused on global scientific research, making Antarctica a key study area. 12 nations built 50 research bases, investigating everything from cosmic rays to glaciology. At first, territorial countries resisted but soon embraced cooperation in the name of science. The collaboration was so impressive that it changed minds. On May 2, 1958, the U.S. proposed keeping Antarctica for scientific purposes. By December 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was born. Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, the USSR, Great Britain, and the USA all signed. The treaty declared Antarctica a peaceful, scientific zone. Article 4 cleverly allowed countries to keep their territorial claims without escalating tensions, and nations could inspect each other's bases to ensure no one was stashing nukes. This was an enormous act of trust during the Cold War. In 1991, it was updated to address environmental concerns, protecting Antarctica as a global park. Today, the treaty has 54 signatories. The continent remains largely untouched, a silent, white wilderness, a place where you can stand at the edge of the earth. It continues to haunt our imaginations.